Welcome to our lecture on the modernist literary movement in American literature in the years from 1914 to 1945. As you can see on this slide, there's an absolutely gorgeous landscape, which is in sharp contrast to what comes later. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what came before modernism? Well, the period of Romanticism and Naturalism, where people felt very, very connected to nature and they looked outward to find the meaning of life, and everything was gorgeous and everything was beautiful, just like on this slide. However, things were about to change. When World War I hit, everybody's perspective changed, and it was the turning point in history that led to the development of the modernist literary movement. What was particularly terrifying about World War I was how much weaponry had advanced. So as you can see on this slide, tanks had recently been created. Machine guns were able to fire off rapid succession of bullets in a very, very short period of time. Air flight was becoming much more advanced, and warplanes were flying everywhere, dropping bombs and shooting each other out of the sky. Lethal gas had recently been created, biological warfare. So this caused loss of life on a massive scale. It terrified, it frightened all the people, and that obviously affected the way authors wrote literature. In addition to World War I, mechanization in factories were booming. People were pouring into cities, factories were being built, sweatshops were operating, and this also shows how technology was developing and everything was becoming less naturalized and more industrialized. You can just imagine how people felt during this period of time. They felt combination of many negative emotions, for example, such as anger, confusion, and disillusionment. So authors needed new ways to express and process their new normal, the way society and the world around them was, as opposed to what it had been. So they reached into the recesses of their mind to answer a lot of questions that they had. This was the actual birth of the modernist literary movement, in addition to modernism across the arts. And the definition says, modernism in the arts is defined as the, quote, radical break from the past and the concurrent search for new forms of expression, end quote. There are many other factors in addition to the war and mechanization that contributed to modernism. In the periods of time before modernism, in the pre-modernism period, people believed in the religious, political, and social constructs that were prevalent in their lives, and they looked outward to those institutions and to nature to ponder the meaning of life. They felt very confident in that, and the bucolic beauty of everything that was surrounding them was definitely expressed in many forms in the arts around that time. In architecture, in literature, in music, everything was flowery, natural, beautiful, ornate. But things certainly changed. In the modernism period, there was a sense of betrayal. People definitely felt let down by the institutions and social constructs they had believed in. It was a definite sense of disillusionment. They believed that all those institutions and constructs led to the horrors of World War I. So they had to make a conscious decision to break away from the thought patterns that they had had before. They had to break away from tradition, and they began to look inward into the recesses of their mind to find answers to life's questions. This led to authors beginning to look inward to explore consciousness and what it means to be a human being within these new social constructs. And also during this period of time, the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud's theories of consciousness and the subconscious were becoming well known, so this was definitely a time for people to look inward to try to find the answers to life's questions rather than looking outward for those answers. Which literary techniques resulted from looking inward? Those that represented fragmentation of life and the narrative. Here are some examples. Authors started to manipulate timelines in what they were writing. They started flashing back, sometimes multiple times. They started flash forwarding and predicting. No longer was there a linear start and finish on the timeline. Things were jumping around all over the place. And also, stream of consciousness became common. What is that, you might ask? This is when authors would write down anything that pops into their mind. All the thoughts, regardless of punctuation and grammar and spelling, all of it would just pour right out as they were thinking it. And as we all know, our thoughts are not always linear. They're not always logical. They jump around from one idea to another. And that's what stream of consciousness is. In addition to techniques that were created, there are some prevalent themes in modernist literature. For example, loneliness. People felt very disconnected from the world around them, and they felt quite lonely as a result. Desperation, fragmentation, resistance to the advancement of technology, and of course, a separation of the self from nature that was quite strong. A sense of alienation from both nature and the mechanized world because the machine does not care. And the stripping away of beauty and ornamentation. Here are a few of many American modernist authors you may have heard of. Some of them, perhaps all of them, perhaps none of them. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, Susan Glaspell, Ernest Hemingway, and T.S. Eliot. Our last slide shows a very clear visual representation of pre-modernism versus modernism. So let's take a look at Penn Station in Manhattan. Good old train station, Penn Station. Look at the old one, the classic one. Look at those beautiful windows. The ceiling is windows. It brings nature inside. The moon is hanging low there. We can see it. People who traveled through on the way to wherever they were going, they felt somehow connected to nature. Nature was inside this urban structure. But current Penn Station's quite a different story. Take a look. It's underground, definitely separated from nature, and it has a complete lack of ornamentation. Anything beautiful and bucolic that brought nature inside is gone. And that's a visual representation of what this whole presentation has been about. Thank you so much for your time.